The helmet cam frame rattles over washboard gravel. Heavy breathing fills the audio. Rhythmic, labored, too fast for the gentle grade. Then a single glance backward, and there it is. A dark shape moving between alder thickets, 60 yards behind, matching pace. The cyclist's hand drops from the handlebar and reaches for a canister clipped to his frame bag. Cut to black. That morning had started quietly. May 27th, 2026. The town of Clearwater, British Columbia, sat under a pale, overcast sky as 34-year-old Marc Filion loaded his gravel bike onto a shuttle van heading north along the Clearwater Valley Road. Filion was Kelowna-based, an endurance cyclist who had logged hard routes across the Caribou and Chilcotin plateaus. Washboard descents, river crossings, overnight bivouacs in the timber. He knew backcountry riding. But this was his first solo push into the upper North Thompson drainage, a corridor he had studied on satellite imagery for weeks and committed to memory. The destination was a decommissioned logging spur known locally as the Raft River West FSR. The road itself tells you something. The Raft River West FSR was formally decommissioned by the BC Ministry of Forests in 2019. That meant berms of packed earth bulldozed across its entrance, culverts pulled from stream crossings and hauled out, the forest invited back in. When Filion arrived at the trailhead, he unclipped from his pedals, shouldered the bike over the berm on foot, remounted on the other side.
But before we get into how conservation officers track that bear down, if this kind of detailed breakdown is something you find valuable, the analysis of what went wrong, the environmental forensics, the decisions that actually matter when you're alone in bear country, then consider hitting subscribe and leaving a like. That's what tells me to keep putting in the research hours on cases like this one. Most channels won't go this deep. I intend to. Anyway, back to the days following Filion's extraction to Kamloops,
And began pedaling into a corridor that saw almost zero human traffic. No logging trucks, no recreational ATVs, no one. What surrounded him was dense, second-growth spruce and alder, the canopy knitting together overhead where the road narrowed. There was no cell service, hadn't been since the turnoff, and the valley he was riding into sat deep inside prime black bear spring forage territory. Late May in the upper North Thompson means skunk cabbage pushing through saturated soil in the drainage bottoms, horsetail shoots lining every seep, and avalanche shoot berry fields pulling bears down from the higher elevations to feed. The corridor was, by every measure, bear country at its most active. There is a distinction that matters here. Bears that live near towns, near highways, near busy trails, they learn what people are. They hear engines, smell campfire smoke, associate the upright shape of a human with noise and unpredictability. Most of the time, that familiarity breeds avoidance. A bear that has bluff-charged a dozen hikers and watched every one of them back away knows the script. But bears in low-contact zones, places where months or even years pass between human encounters, lack that wariness entirely. They have no template for what a person is, no learned caution. And when a bear without that caution encounters a human, the calculus shifts. A predatory approach becomes more likely than a defensive bluff charge. The animal does not run. It does not huff or pop its jaw. It follows. Filion reached roughly 11 kilometers in and stopped where a culvert outflow still trickled across the road surface, a remnant of the old drainage system. He straddled the frame, pulled a water bottle from its cage, and crouched to refill it. Somewhere in that pause, straightening up, wiping his hands on his jersey, he noticed the scat. It sat on the gravel surface less than 20 meters from where he knelt. dark, seed-flecked, still moist. Fresh enough that the late morning air hadn't dried its edges. Filion registered it. Any backcountry rider would. He scanned the tree line, saw nothing, heard nothing but the faint rush of the culvert outflow and a Swainson's thrush calling somewhere in the spruce. He clipped back in and kept riding. What he did not know, could not have known, was that a mature male black bear, estimated later by conservation officers at roughly 180 kilograms, had already picked up his scent.
The animal was behind him, downwind, moving through the alder on the road's shoulder at a patient, unhurried pace. It had been following for some time, and Mark Filion, pedaling steadily deeper into a road no one else used, had no idea it was there. 11 kilometers into a decommissioned logging road with no cell service and fresh bear scat still glistening on the gravel behind him, Mark Filion pedaled deeper into the North Thompson corridor, while something followed from downwind. The grade tilted upward, not steeply, just enough to slow cadence, just enough to make the legs register the climb. On either side of the road, alder had reclaimed the shoulders. Dense, head-high walls of it, gray-barked and tangled, pressing in until the corridor of open sky above the gravel narrowed to a pale strip. Filion could see the road 30 meters ahead and 30 meters behind. Beyond that, nothing. The forest had closed like a curtain. This is the kind of terrain where a predatory black bear operates with terrible efficiency. And the word predatory matters here, because it describes a mode of behavior that most people never learn to distinguish from the defensive encounters they have heard about. And that distinction can mean everything. A defensive black bear is a bear that feels cornered. It huffs. It clacks its jaws. It may slap the ground or lunge forward in a bluff charge meant to drive you away. It is loud, and it wants you to know it is upset. The standard advice, make yourself large, make noise, stand your ground, exists for this animal, and it works. A predatory black bear does not vocalize, does not bluff charge, does not display stress signals. It does none of these things because it is not afraid and it is not defensive. It is hunting. It simply closes distance quietly, often from behind, treating the human as prey rather than a threat. There is no warning. There is no escalation. There is only a gap that gets smaller. This inverts everything most people think they know about surviving a bear encounter. Making yourself large and loud addresses the wrong animal. A predatory follow demands a fundamentally different response. You must stop, turn, face the bear directly, and deploy your deterrent while distance still exists. You must become confrontational in a way that feels deeply counterintuitive when every instinct says run. But running, or in Filion's case, riding, is precisely what a trailing predator is waiting for. Filion did not know any of this in those terms. What he knew was the road, the rhythm of the pedals, and the sound of his own breathing. He caught the movement in a backward glance. Roughly 70 yards behind him, something dark shifted between the alder stems at the road's edge. His first thought was another cyclist, someone else who had found the FSR and decided to ride it. A shape, upright for a moment against the gray tangle, then lower, then moving again. He pedaled harder. The gravel popped under his tires. He looked back a second time. It was not a cyclist. The silhouette resolved into mass and intention. A large black bear moving along the road at a steady, unhurried pace, its head low and forward, its gait smooth. Not running, not retreating, following. In this moment, Filion had bear spray. It was clipped to his frame bag, accessible within seconds. He had a road wide enough to stand on.
He had 70 yards of open gravel between himself and the animal. He had, in short, every component of the recommended response within reach. He chose the bike. It is an understandable choice. The bicycle had carried him thousands of kilometers through remote terrain. It was speed. It was escape. Every fiber of instinct told him to use it, to put power through the pedals and open that gap until the animal gave up. But a predatory black bear does not give up because the distance grows. It gives up when the prey stops being prey. And Filion, bent low over his handlebars, legs driving, back turned, was prey in motion. The acceleration did not discourage the bear. It triggered a pursuit response, the ancient, hardwired reaction to a fleeing animal that converts a patient, trailing predator into a charging one.
The bear began to run. 400 meters. That was the distance Filion had when he made his decision. On a paved road with a tailwind, a fit cyclist might hold that margin. On loose gravel, climbing, on a bike loaded for backcountry, 400 meters is not a buffer. It is a countdown. The 70 yards became 50, then 30. The alder walls blurred past. The road tipped into a slight downhill bend, and Filion's tires skipped on the washboard surface. Behind him, the bear was still closing, and Filion's back was still turned. 400 meters of gravel was all that separated Marc Filion from a predatory black bear in full pursuit, and every pedal stroke kept his back to the animal closing behind him. The gap did not hold. On a slight downhill bend where the road curved left and the alder pressed close on both sides, the bear overtook him. 180 kilograms of muscle struck from behind and pulled Filion off the bike in a single motion, dragging him across the gravel and into the road shoulder. The attack was fast and directional. The bear targeted his upper body, inflicting severe lacerations to both shoulders, the upper back, and his scalp. Filion hit the ground with the bike partially beneath him, the frame and wheels momentarily tangling between his body and the animal. What happened next lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but those seconds contained the only decision that mattered. Filion rolled. He did not try to stand, did not try to crawl away. He rolled onto his back, faced the bear, and reached for the canister that had been clipped to his frame bag since he loaded the bike onto the shuttle van that morning in Clearwater. The same canister his hand had reached for minutes earlier, when 70 yards still separated him from the animal. He discharged the bear spray at a range of roughly 1 to 2 meters, directly into the face of a bear that was now on top of him. The spray hit the bear's eyes, nose, and open mouth at a concentration the deterrent was engineered for. The animal recoiled. It broke contact, turned, and crashed into the timber on the uphill side of the road. Within seconds, the sound of it moving through the underbrush faded into the spruce. This was the moment the encounter finally shifted. Not when Filion accelerated on the bike. Not when he identified the shape behind him. Here, face to face, flat on his back, bleeding, with a canister aimed at close range. The tool worked at the distance it was designed for, in the posture the situation demanded. The bitter truth was that this confrontation could have happened at 70 yards, on his feet, with the bike between him and the bear and the spray already in his hand. Instead, it happened on the ground, after the attack, because outrunning a predator on 2 wheels had never been a viable option. Filion lay on the gravel for several minutes. Blood ran from his scalp wounds into the dirt. The lacerations across his shoulders and upper back were deep, and his left arm had limited function. But he was conscious, and the bear was gone. He pulled himself upright. He retrieved the bike, which was scratched and bent, but still rollable. And then he began the slow, grinding effort of moving back the way he had come. Not riding, but walking,
leaning on the frame, dragging it and himself down the logging road. 2 kilometers. On a decommissioned road that no one was supposed to be on, every meter of that distance carried the same question: whether the timber on either side still held the animal that had just tried to kill him. 2 kilometers later, he found people. A pair of forestry contractors had driven their truck up a connecting spur to assess a washout. They were the first human presence on this stretch of road in weeks, possibly months. Their truck carried satellite communication equipment. They stabilized Filion as best they could and called for extraction. A BC Emergency Health Services helicopter reached the site and airlifted Filion to Royal Inland Hospital in Kamloops, where surgeons operated on the deep tissue wounds across his back and shoulders. The injuries were serious. He survived. 2 days later, conservation officers returned to the Raft River West FSR corridor with dogs. They located and destroyed the bear within a kilometer of the attack site. A necropsy showed normal body condition, no signs of disease or starvation. The animal had not been desperate. It had not been defending cubs or a food cache.
It had simply identified a lone human moving away from it on a road no one else used, and it had followed. The findings reinforced the predatory classification, a healthy bear making a calculated approach on available prey. The lesson is not complicated. On a remote road with no escape vehicle and a trailing predator, the bike is not an escape tool. It is transport. Stopping, turning to face the animal, and deploying deterrent early, that is the act that changes the outcome. It is the act that turns a predatory sequence into a confrontation the bear did not choose, at a distance where spray and posture and noise have their full effect. Filion himself said as much from his hospital bed. Stop, turn around, use what you have before it uses you.